When my daughter-in-law banned me from attending my nephew's birthday because it smelled bad, I changed the locks on the house. And now there will be no party. I am 66 years old and a single man. I lost my wife 3 years ago, and since then, I have been alone. In fact, I am heartbroken. Next Sunday is my grandson's birthday, and my daughter-in-law hasn't invited me to the party. I didn't even know a party was being organized until my friend, who is their neighbor, told me that his granddaughter received an invitation card for my grandson's birthday. He didn't know I hadn't been invited. We walked together in the mornings, and on our way, he mentioned the party. It was shocking because I am very close to my grandson, and he loves me too. He turns 1 next Sunday. When my friend mentioned the party, I thought it was a small cake-cutting event just with the neighbor kids. But my friend told me the party was going to be big, and not only kids but adults were also invited. The invitation had the child's name plus one. It also included dinner. This was incredible because my son isn't well off financially to spend so much money on his son's party. I responded to my friend that he was exaggerating, but then he sent me a picture of the invitation card. He was right, the party looked big. This left me wondering why I wasn't invited to the party. I became anxious and tried to calm myself by thinking that maybe they had forgotten to invite me or that the invitation was on its way. There were still 12 days until the party. My anxiety worsened, and I went to see my grandson. When I arrived, I saw my daughter-in-law absorbed in her phone while my grandson played alone on the lawn. I picked him up and played with him while my daughter-in-law watched from the window. My daughter-in-law has always resented me. She never liked me or my wife. I really don't understand the reason behind her dislike, but maybe she thinks we were inferior to her. She is from a wealthy family, but we are not rich. We are not poor, but we don't have as much money as her father. Apart from money, it's also a matter of social status. Her father is a lawyer, but I'm just a mechanic with a workshop. If she is proud of her father's money, then it's an empty pride because her father despises her and doesn't give her a cent, not even when she needs it the most. Last year, during COVID, when my son lost his job, their finances were greatly affected. She is a housewife, so they only had one source of income. Losing that job was a hard blow for them. They started living off their savings, but eventually, those ran out too. My workshop business also slowed down during the lockdown. Nevertheless, I helped them as much as I could, but my finances were also tight. Their situation became so bad that they couldn't pay the rent for their house and received an eviction notice from the landlord. I lived alone, so I offered them to move into my house while I moved to the workshop. I have a 2-bedroom house with a children's room. I could have stayed in my house with them, but I knew my daughter-in-law would be uncomfortable around me. That's the background of my situation. When I went to see my grandson this morning, I thought my daughter-in-law would talk to me about her birthday plans. But to my disappointment, she didn't say a word. Until now, I hoped they had forgotten to invite me, but now it seems evident that she doesn't want me there. It breaks my heart to think about what I did wrong to deserve this treatment. I've always tried to make their lives comfortable and help them, and this is what I get in return. Update 1. Thank you for all the kind words. You are right. We in-laws, especially in our 60s, are treated like third-class citizens by our daughters-in-law. It feels very lonely in this world. The 60s are really a difficult time, too old to live and still young to die. Let me tell you, my friend, if you have a partner in your 50s and 60s, appreciate her because you will miss her like hell. I never felt the need for a friend until I had my wife. But after her death, my life is so empty. Yesterday, my son called and said they would leave my grandson with me as they were going shopping. Yes, I babysit my grandson for them because hiring a nanny costs money, and here this old man offers free service. They know how to exploit me emotionally, financially, and in every possible way. When they came back to pick him up, I asked my son if they had finished shopping for the party. His face turned pale. Their car was full of stuff in the back seat, and some of the decorative items were sticking out of the rear window. He just brushed it off and said, "Oh no, there's no party. We just bought some toys for the baby." He's not good at lying. I looked at him seriously and said, "I saw the invitation card you gave to the neighbors." Before my son could say anything, my daughter-in-law shouted, "So what? Are you angry because you needed an invitation to a child's birthday party? Are you a little kid?" The way she defended herself angered me. I was furious, but I responded calmly, "Watch your tone, lady." My son said he would visit me the next day to sort things out. I kept waiting, but he never showed up. How naive of me to think he would come to apologize for his wife's behavior and ask me to join the party. I know what you're thinking, old fool. Yes, that's me. I wondered how they could afford such a big party. Then I realized they were organizing a party with my money. Last month, my son borrowed money from me to pay his car payment. He said he had defaulted for 2 months, and now the bank was after him for the payment. He promised to return it this month. Whenever he asks for money, I know he won't return it, but I still lend it to him. I know I'm indulgent with him, but look at my situation. I only have one son whom I can call family. I only have a few years left. What am I going to do with my money? In the end, it will go to him. Why not give it to him when he needs it? Until now, I never asked him to return the money he borrowed, but today I called him and asked for the money I lent him last month. I said, "You promised to return it this month, right? So where is it?" He never expected his dad to ask him to return the money. I said, "I want the money by this week, as promised." He said, "What?" I affirmed, "You heard me right. I want my money by this week." He came to visit me in the afternoon. I confronted him about his wife's resentment towards me. He said he was aware but couldn't do much. I said, "Of course, you can't make your wife love me, but surely you can stop lying to me for money. I know you lied about the car mortgage to borrow money for this birthday party. I also know this party isn't just for the kids. The adults are invited too, including dinner. Do you really have that much money to feed your friends and neighbors but not me? Whose money are you using for the event?" After my outburst, he said, "Are you angry because we didn't invite you? If so, it's not me. Sandra, my daughter-in-law, prepared the guest list." I shouted, "You have no say in it. Sandra's decision is a sort of law that cannot be questioned or changed. Are you telling me that you are okay with your wife not inviting your father to your son's first birthday and for no reason at all?" He stayed silent with a somber face. What else could he do? He is too weak to open his mouth in front of his narcissistic wife. He is helpless to stand up to me because he needs my money. Sometimes I blame myself for not raising a strong son. Update 2. I was determined not to take any revenge, but guess what I did? Sandra, my daughter-in-law, crossed all limits of toxicity and manipulation. On the day of the birthday, I was sitting in a corner of my workshop, drinking and brooding when I received a call from my son. I was so stupid to think that maybe his guilty conscience had surfaced, and he was calling to invite me to the party. Don't curse me if I say that I even bought gifts for my grandson, thinking that if I were invited at the last minute, I would have to rush. I know I exceeded all levels of desperation. I thought even if they didn't invite me, I owed my grandson a gift and would give it to him the next day. To shatter my illusions, the call was to babysit my grandson. He had to rush to the office for some urgent work. He said Sandra had gone to pick up her parents from the airport. Hearing this, I lost my mind. I mean, her parents were flying from 2 states away, but I wasn't invited, and I live a block away. Before I could say anything, he said he was already in his car, leaving the baby alone in the crib, so I should hurry. Without thinking twice, I rushed to babysit my grandson. While playing with him, the phone rang. I ignored it a few times, but it kept vibrating. I thought it might be an emergency call, so I answered. It was Sandra. She thought she was talking to my son. She was calling to give him some instructions about the decorations. She had been calling his phone, but he wasn't answering. She got angry when she heard my voice. I told her I wasn't invading her house. Her husband had to rush to the office urgently, so he requested I babysit his son. She screamed at me to leave the house because she didn't want her parents to see me. I said, "How do you want me to leave the child alone at home?" She said she would be there in an hour. The child could manage alone until then, but she didn't want me to be present in her house when her parents arrived. She said I smelled of fuel and oil, and my hands and clothes were dirty with grease. I looked filthy, and she didn't want her parents or anyone to see me in her house. I felt humiliated. It was outrageous. I cried like a baby, holding my grandson in my arms. I can't explain how terrible I felt at that moment. I quickly got up to leave because if she arrived and saw me there, she would scold me mercilessly. As I was closing the door behind me, an idea struck me. Damn it, it's my house, yes. I gave them my house to live in as a goodwill gesture, and no, they don't pay me rent. I thought, lady, I am no longer a doormat. I quickly called my workers with toolboxes. They helped me change the locks on the house, packed their clothes and other belongings, and threw them on the front porch. They just dumped all their clothes in some boxes that were in the workshop. All the big items like furniture and electronics were mine, they hadn't brought any. After that, I held my grandson and waited on the front lawn for Sandra to arrive. As soon as I saw her car pulling into the driveway, I approached her, handed the baby through the window, and walked towards my workshop. She sat the baby in the car or maybe handed him to her parents and came after me, screaming. She yelled, asking me why I was still there when she had asked me to leave. I didn't even bother to look at her or respond. I just said, if you need help moving your things, call me. Before she could react or understand, I walked away. A few minutes later, my phone was blowing up with her calls. I ignored them. Then she sent voice messages asking why the lock wouldn't open and why her stuff was thrown outside the house. I laughed at her messages. I thought, woman, get the hint, you are homeless now. I went to my workshop and sat in the doorway, knowing that she or my son would soon show up. And there he was. He came rushing toward me. I said, before you get any evil thoughts, let me tell you, there are cameras installed everywhere, and they are fully functional. She yelled and basically repeated the same thing, why the house wouldn't open. I said, I changed the locks, and the key is inside the workshop. It smells of oil and grease and other nuisances. Do you want to touch that key? She was dumbfounded. She pulled her hair and screamed, asking why I changed the locks. I looked at her sternly and replied, remember, that house is mine. I did a favor by letting you all live there. She interrupted and said, then why did you throw our things outside? I said, because I changed my mind. I no longer want you to live there. She stomped her foot, went back to her car, and left. I knew this wasn't over. After a while, my son appeared with red eyes from crying. That's his manipulation technique. He said, Dad, please give us the keys. I promise Sandra will be nice to you. She will apologize. I stopped him short. Really? Sandra will apologize? Where is she? His face lit up, and he asked if Sandra apologized, would I give the house back? I said, I don't know. I might consider it depending on how she does it. He got up to call Sandra. From the way he was talking, it seemed like she wasn't ready to apologize. But within 10 minutes, she arrived. She started by saying, look, I'm sorry. I said, wait, let's sit inside the workshop and talk. She was reluctant to enter, but my son gave her a look, and she followed us inside, covering her face with a napkin. Her apology seemed like a favor to me. She said, okay, I'm sorry. I won't yell at you again. Give us the keys. I was perplexed by her way of apologizing. I looked at my son with wide eyes. She continued, okay, I'm sorry again. Stop making faces. Our guests will arrive soon. We need to fix everything, and yes, you can also join the party, but please wear new clothes. I could no longer tolerate her tone. I stood up and shouted, out. Just get out of here and never show your damn face again. You will not get the house back, not even when I die. Instead of apologizing for her behavior, she started yelling at my son, see, I told you, you won't listen. We should call the police. He pushed her hands away and shouted back, that's his house. We can't call the police on him. The police will scold us for mistreating him. They left the workshop, yelling at each other. My friend, who lived next door, said Sandra and my son returned and told her parents what had happened. Maybe she was trying to manipulate the truth when my son intervened and explained the whole truth. You could hear her parents yelling at her. Update 3, my loser son showed up at my door again. It had been a week since I kicked them out. It was almost midnight when I heard his knock. I opened the door and told him I had no business with him. He took my hands and began begging me to let him into the house. He said he had been living in the car for a week. He didn't have enough money to rent another house. With his income, it's hard to make ends meet even for household expenses. He started crying, saying he couldn't afford the rent. I said, why don't you ask your spoiled wife to get a job? He said she just didn't want to work. She considered herself a prize for him because she was out of his league. I burst into laughter. Sure, then show your trophy to get bread. This old man has done enough for all of you. I said, your wife has always been narcissistic towards me, yet I provided all my support. I gave up my house and lived in the garage because I loved you and wanted you to be comfortable. What did I get in return? You allowed your wife to humiliate me. You don't have the guts to take a stand. If you have a golden wife and surely can't displease her, then live with that gold and don't come to me for help. He played his last card, saying, "Please, Dad, give us the house for the sake of your grandson." I replied, "Enough with the emotional manipulation. Don't you dare blackmail me anymore. Until now, you extorted me for my money and my house, saying, 'Dad, please don't do this for the sake of your son.' Now that card isn't working, you are using your son to get your way. Get out of here. You won't get anything." The next day, he showed up with his wife and son. I said, "I will not accept an apology. It's not about birthday invitations. The hatred is deep-rooted. She hates me for my job. She considers it insignificant. I will not allow anyone to mock my profession. Mechanic jobs can be dirty, and our hands can be stained with oil and grease, but they involve skills you have. You are unemployed just because you are pretty, and your dad being a lawyer doesn't give you the right to humiliate others." She fell to her knees and begged for forgiveness, but I slammed the door in her face. I don't want to have any contact with that toxic woman and her spineless husband. I know it's not the end of the world for them to be kicked out of the house. Eventually, they will rebuild their lives. I also know they will never forgive me. In fact, they will fill my grandson with bitterness towards me. But that's fine. I've given enough of myself to be nice to my daughter-in-law. I've learned the hard way that even if you give your life, some people will never appreciate you. Now I'm okay with that. I'm okay being called a grumpy and selfish old man who kicked his son, daughter-in-law, and 1-year-old grandson out of the house to live on the streets. The only regret I have is for my grandson. That little creature has no idea what kind of parents he has. He is living an uncomfortable life because of his stupid parents, but I won't do anything about it. Update 4. My daughter-in-law tried to break into my house but failed, and the police took her away. After her last attempt at an apology, which, as you read, was pretty pathetic, she tried to sneak into my house. She came in the middle of the night, broke a window, and wanted to enter. But as an old man, I am a light sleeper, so when I heard it, I called the police. I didn't know it was my daughter-in-law. I just thought it was someone trying to rob me. I'm thankful that the only weapon I have is in the workshop because that could have been pretty bad. Back to the topic, even if I had known it was my daughter-in-law, I would still have called the police. She had already entered and was looking for my door keys when the police arrived and I turned on the lights, so she couldn't escape. They took her away for trespassing. She then called my son, who came to my house in the morning, yelling at me for all this. According to him, my grandson couldn't be without his mother. He also asked if I could babysit while he tried to get her out of jail, though I don't know with what money he would do it. I said absolutely not and that I was thinking of calling Child Protective Services because they clearly weren't being good parents. He finally left, although that last part wasn't just an empty threat. I am seriously considering it, as some commenters suggested before. Update 5. Well, there's good and bad news in this update, although none bad for me. To start, my daughter-in-law's father traveled to help his daughter, though he was very upset, and not just because his daughter was in jail now. The day they traveled for the birthday party, everything that had been happening came to light. So, my daughter-in-law's father was very upset with her. He helped her get out of jail, but as I understand it, he cut off all contact with her afterward. I know this because my son told me one day when he came to ask for the house back. So, after he left, later that day, I called Child Protective Services, who took my grandson and gave him to me as I am the closest direct relative. I don't know what will happen now as this is temporary, but I'm happy to spend time with my grandson. We even celebrated his birthday together, where I could give him my gifts. He is still too young to understand what's happening, though he senses something.